All right, greetings and thank you for coming to today's operator meeting. I'm your host, Jenny Lehman. We will take all questions at the end of all presentations, so please just chat those in as you're ready. With that said, first up, we have Chris Eisinger with a presentation on Form 3A revisions. Take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Eisinger. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Information Applied Technology Manager here at ECMC. And what I just want to very quickly do is talk about some changes we are making as I speak to the Form 3A. These are mostly display type revisions, but I want to go over that. So for anyone looking at their Form 3A after this, when we do make them accessible again, you will see some visual changes to your form. I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully everyone can see this. So these revisions were made over the course of the last several weeks, both from feedback from our own staff as well as operators. And like I said, these are mostly visual change. But the first one is we've improved summary information for financial assurance obligations, especially for the option 3 and 4 operators that have existing active instruments. And what that looks like is here you're going to see, again, if you're just an option 3 or 4 operator, you're going to see several new fields on many of the rule sections where it provides detail, where it shows you your contribution amount. So if you're an option 3 operator, you have a 5% contribution. Option 4 is 10%. And it will show you the contribution amount. And then additionally, it shows the active financial assurance that exists already, that is held by ECMC. This is part of the calculation for what the total financial assurance amount due will be. And so hopefully this information will provide some clarity that wasn't there before. And if you have questions about this, please reach out to our staff, our financial assurance staff. The other thing that we made a change was just more information generally throughout the form, including one of the things is showing if it's an existing or new instrument. Sometimes it gets hard to keep track of that. So now it's clearly indicated whether you're working with an existing financial assurance instrument or working with a new one. You just add it to the Form 3A. Also, we've added the ability to add bond writers as a type. So if that's a situation that applies to you, you will see that in the drop down for financial assurance type in new instruments. Additionally, there's been some changes to the accounting in the form. Some of the calculations didn't appear to be working correctly, so those should be fixed now. And then other miscellaneous improvements. And so, like I said, this is being done as I speak. So right now, no one should have access to their Form 3A's draft or ones that have already been submitted. Once this update is completed, you should be able to access them again through the eForms platform. All the Form 3A should be updated. You will see some visual changes, but there shouldn't be any change to the financial assurance amounts that are due or how you have assigned your existing and new instruments. If you should see anything that looks different or anomalous, please let us know. But we're trying to ensure that that doesn't happen. So that really is it. Oh, here's the example. Now you'll see these labels showing if it's existing or new throughout the form. So that was all I had to say about the Form 3A. Just as another comment regarding the Form 3C, which will be the form to request release of bonds. That is, we are finishing developing that, and my hope is that it will be available to folks in the next 2 or 3 weeks. In the meantime, you can still request release of bonds using the way you've done it always, which is just contacting Debbie Lutz, our financial assurance lead. So that is all I have, Jenny. Thank you. I'll take any questions at the end.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Chris. Next up, we have Arthur Kepsel with a Form 46 update. Take it away, Arthur.
Thank you, Jenny. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Arthur Kepsel. I'm an environmental protection specialist with the ECMC. And today I was going to just give a brief update on the Form 46. My slides will go. So just as a reminder about the Form 46 and House Bill 1348, the House bill was passed in 2022 and went into effect on July 31st, 2023, and we're still working on developing some of the forms, so we have not fully implemented it yet. And the House bill requires all chemical products and ingredients used in downhole operations to be disclosed to the ECMC. The chemical constituents used to make up the chemical products will be submitted by the chemical manufacturer, and operators will then report all chemical products used in their downhole operations on a location-by-location basis. The chemical information received from the manufacturer and operators will be aggregated into a chemical disclosure list and stored by location ID where the information can be viewed by the public. In addition, the chemical disclosure list will be provided to the operator to distribute to the public as required in the legislation. So right now, for implementing this, we would like to be a little further along than we are, but we're getting closer. And then House Bill 1348 will be implemented through two forms to gather the required information. The first of the forms will be the Form 46, the Chemical Product Registration Form. It's nearly complete, and this is going to be completed by the manufacturers or their designee. It's currently undergoing its second round of testing, so we're getting fairly close. And we made some revisions, which I will go over in a minute, based on the comments from the industry beta testing that's already been completed. The changes made to the form related to trade secret protections while being able to meet the intent of House Bill 1348. The form will be put into service as soon as the second round of testing is complete, barring some need to make significant changes to the form. The second form is the 46A, which is the chemical product use form, and this will be completed by operators. And currently, it's under construction and should be ready to test by the end of September and deployed for use in October. So the big change that we made was adding a checkbox so that chemical manufacturers can declare their product a trade secret if they feel it is appropriate. So as you can see, we've added this on the right there. You can kind of see that we've added this checkbox. If a chemical manufacturer checks that checkbox, they will have to provide a little more information. So if the box is checked, the manufacturer will need to check all the additional boxes that drop down and provide an attachment with additional detail regarding the trade secret affirmations. This is very similar to what is being done currently on the Form 41 under Rule 208. This will just keep all of this information together by not using the Form 41. And also you'll be required to have an attachment. This is exactly like what's done in the Form 41. The attachment will be similar. You can use for the submission of a Form 41. So you'll add your attachment, and the additional details required for the affirmations don't need to be very long. The additional details may be short, plain statements made in good faith. Examples for each are included here. You can read these later. I'll keep this up. I don't really want to go through all of them, but these examples are included. And the last change we made was changing the email from what you see on the right, because there was some concern about the chemical products, and you could see the chemical ingredient list. So that's been removed. So now you'll just have a very brief email that says the submitted form has been approved that you can keep for your records. And I think that's all I have. If there's any questions regarding the Form 46, please feel free to add them to the chat. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Arthur. Next up, we have Greg Geronimo for a Form 7 produced water update. And then if Arthur, you can stop sharing your screen here.
Thank you, Jenny, and I will share my screen here. Hopefully this works. So good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Duranlo. I'm the environmental manager here at ECMC. Today, I'm just going to go through the status of the development of the required produced water data reporting as required by House Bill 23-1242. Quickly, I'm going to go over the form that we are developing. It's getting very close to ready for testing. We've developed a instructions document for how to develop that form. I've also, based on conversations with operators, I've come up with some scenarios that I hope will help shed some light on how we intend to collect the data. And so I'll just start by going through here our the produced water data reporting tab. I believe when I last presented to this group, we were not 100% certain, but we're certainly leaning towards having this data reporting be a tab on the Form 7 and not a standalone Form 7W, as we were calling it in July. And that is the case, and that's what we've developed. We've also made some minor modifications to the produced water data reporting template, though those modifications are really in the instructions. They are not in the the individual columns are the same as we originally presented in July. Again, I've got some examples of some scenarios, and then I'll walk through the instructions document briefly. So this should look pretty familiar to what's already been presented. This is a screenshot of the development of the Form 7. So your standard monthly report of operations tab is still there, and now there will be an inserted produced water data tab. This view is, I believe, is actually, you can actually see this in the production server when you log into a new or open a new Form 7. The functionality isn't there on the outside until we complete the testing and turn it on, but I believe it's viewable. Just like with the monthly report of production operations, on this tab, you will click the modify or view the monthly produced water report button, which will take you to the screen in a separate pop-up window, which will allow you to populate the data. You can either download the data template, or you can add individual rows of data manually. Pretty hard to read, I recognize that. This is the data template and what it will look like in terms of the columns and instructions. Just zooming in on that section, the columns, as I mentioned, have stayed the same: fresh water used, recycled, reused, water used, produced water for disposal, the disposal method and disposal location, or in the case of reuse and recycling, it's produced water used on-site versus off-site. These instructions, as I mentioned, have been modified slightly to better focus what we're trying to accomplish with the data. So I'll get into that in just a minute. This slide, and these will all be pushed to the forms instruction page as well as the operator meeting page. So you'll have a chance to read through these and digest them. But this just describes basically what we're looking for in each of the data cells. Notably, this disposal location has seen some changes since I presented last. We are focused on receiving location IDs for disposal locations rather than, for example, UIC facility IDs, centralized E&P waste management facility IDs, et cetera, et cetera. We really want to get the location ID because that will help us when we move forward with the quarterly location reporting. Having the location ID reported as the facility here will translate to better data quality when we collect the location data. So these codes, disposal codes, have not changed. The rules establish, the allowable mechanisms for produced water disposal. And so these disposal codes have not changed. It's important to note that disposal codes and disposal location are only necessary for produced water that is disposed, and not necessary for produced water that is recycled or reused. So I think I've fielded some questions about, well, how do we describe where it's going when it gets recycled or reused? And we don't need to track that. We can kind of essentially check the box that it's being done, and that works for us because, again, we will collect that data on a aggregated scale with the quarterly location reporting. So as I mentioned, the disposal methods is where we've made some changes. And so these are sort of ordered preferences for what facility ID we want entered into the database for the disposal locations. And as you can see, preference number 1 is location ID, location ID, location ID, location ID. So for commercial class 1 disposal, that disposal well, because it's permitted, will have an associated oil and gas location. Likewise, for commercial class 2 disposal, there will be a location ID. So we want to use that location ID. A commercial facility that does not have a well, and so maybe they're doing evaporation pits, etc., but it's all permitted through CDPHE, solid and hazardous materials unit. Those won't have a COGCC location ID or facility ID, so there's sort of nothing to populate in there. So that's the only one for which we would expect that to be blank. If water is disposed directly into a pit on site, then we do want to get the pit facility ID. If the pit is off site, even if it's just at a remote tank battery that has a different location ID, then we actually want the location ID instead of the pit facility ID. Most of those will be on site though. Centralized facility that's a disposal well, our primary key is going to be the location ID again. And for if it's going to a pit for disposal at that facility, it's the location ID. Surface water discharge number, these are a 9-digit code issued by CDPHE beginning with the letters CO. And so that's what we'll expect to see. If it's a surface discharge, we'll want to see that discharge number. And then beneficial reuse would be covered by a waste management document ID or a Form 4 document ID. So here's what that data will look like once you import the data or add your rows. It will populate on the produced water data report page. And then we also do have a provision. We realize that there are maybe some cases where operators have submitted production data for wells from which no water was produced and for which no water was used downhole. In that case, a produced water data report is not required. but we need the operator to affirmatively check the box that they're not required to submit a produced water data report. So if that box is checked, it will allow the form to be submitted without that template data attached. This you've seen before. It's sort of got some scenarios that, just sort of some examples for some make-believe wells and how the water was distributed among the production. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you have questions, please reach out. Here are some examples that I will put forward on this. So this is just like a simplified version of a complex water system where reporting is required. And you can see there's a couple of production well pads. There's a new well pad, there's a disposal well pad, and then there's some centralized E&P waste management facilities where the water is moved around the entire system. Some of it comes onto these waste management facilities, goes out to the new drill. Some of it, goes between the facilities, and some of it goes to disposal. So for example, from production well pad, if most of the water being produced from this pad is going into a facility where a substantial volume of the water is going out to a new drill, then that water is intended for recycling. And so the water reported from any one of these wells could reasonably be reported as offsite recycling. And so we would expect to see a portion of that. In aggregate, the operator would need to be mindful of the total volume going through their centralized facilities and going out to the new drill pad. For example, if there's 100 barrels of water produced from each of these wells, that's 600 barrels of water. If the new drill pad only used 100 barrels of water, we wouldn't expect then to see all 600 of these showing as going to recycling just because it's geographically convenient. If 100 is going to the new drill and 100 is going to the disposal well pad, or 500 is going to the disposal well pad, then we would expect that to be reflected in what's reported from those production wells. And again, on the other side of this sort of simplified water system, there's the production pad 2 is going into this centralized E&P waste management facility. Some of it is moving around among the facilities, but most of it's going to these disposal wells. Then the operator should report the production from these wells as going to disposal. So centralized. So even though it's ultimately being disposed down a well, the first facility it's going to, where it's essentially it's marked as a disposal point, is the centralized E&P waste management facility. So that's the facility where we want to track the disposal to. And so the disposal method should actually be CP, since the point of disposal is here, and the disposal facility should be the location ID at this centralized E&P waste management facility. And I know that's kind of pretty confusing, and I think that'll take some time to kind of get used to and make sure that we're operators and agency are on the same page with that reporting. Since there's no wells on those E&P waste management facilities, they'll be reported with the quarterly location reporting, not the well reporting. Here's another simple example. Multi-well production pad, water is trucked to a commercial UIC facility. There's all these COGCC facility ID numbers associated with that UIC facility, but what we want to get is the location ID for that disposal. So that we're trying to simplify that scenario and get it down to the location ID. And then just, again, these are grabbed from that prior example. Production well pad, if it's being disposed of at this pit, it's CP and the location ID is what we want to see. Production well going directly to a centralized, this could be a water flood system, as well as a water system. We want to see the location ID as the disposal site. So after this meeting, we will publish our this presentation with those examples and a instructions document, which has been drafted, is still subject to review on our forms page on the website. I'm going to walk through excuse me, I'm going to try and walk through our forms instruction real quick. This is a familiar template for folks. The statute and the rules are cited at the top of this document. And again, I will have this posted hopefully later today. Description of the purpose of the form. And then it just walks through the instructions outline, basically walking through each point of data entry and providing instructions for each point of data entry. So hopefully this will kind of fill in any gaps that may be left after this quick discussion. As far as status of our forms development, we are very close to having a form that we are able to release for testing. A couple of operators have spoken with me about being willing to test the data, and I know, or test the form, and I know they're collecting data in a format that they believe will work. And so I would certainly encourage anyone who wants to be part of the test party to reach out to me, and I will try and reach out to those that I know are already interested in that. And then, you know, because the statute does require, you know, to be submitted concurrently with the production reporting beginning in September. If you are ready to report your production, we don't want you to delay your monthly production reports. So you should be able to submit those without the produced water data template at this time. And if you're worried about meeting your statutory obligations, you can send via email to me the, you know, your data template that you've put together, or whatever summary you have put together and prepared. I'll just accept those, and you know, we may or may not figure out how to get them populated into the database. But I know many operators are working and are very close to having things ready. Some folks have things ready to submit and are just waiting on our forms. So we just don't want to delay the monthly production reporting. So that's all I've got. Chris, I don't know if you have any additional updates on the timing of the form development, but to the best of my knowledge, we're hoping to have it ready for testing this week. Is that correct?
That is correct, Greg. I think we will be able to have our external testers participate by the end of this week.
Excellent. Thank you. And my apologies for going over time. I will stop sharing my screen and we can move on to the next presenter.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Next up, we have Stephen Schwartz with the new statutory definition of disproportionately impacted communities. Go ahead, Stephen.
All right, thank you, Jenny. Let me share my screen. All right. Is that displaying all right?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Thank you and hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Schwartz, hearing liaison in the Planning and Permitting Unit here at ECMC, and I'm here today to talk to you about a project we've been working with our colleagues in the AG's office regarding the new disproportionately impacted community definition. and how we're implementing that here at the ECMC. First, I'll briefly go over the House Bill 23-1233, which instituted the new statewide disproportionately impacted community, or DI community definition, how ECMC is implementing this new definition, and also briefly go over the new DI communities map layer on our GIS map. So House Bill 23-1233 was passed this year, and one of the elements was to formally incorporate some of the recommendations from the Environmental Justice Action Task Force, more specifically a statewide definition of disproportionately impacted communities for all state agencies to use. And this is a quick screenshot of that section of the bill speaking to the all statewide agencies shall use portion. So this new bill went into effect on May 23rd, 2023. And this new May 2023 definition differs slightly from the 100 series definition in our ECMC rules. And I just want to remind everyone that ECMC, formerly COGCC, was the first agency in Colorado to implement a definition for DI communities. Since then, other agencies introduced their own definitions, and there was a recommendation for a more unified definition, and that was codified in House Bill 23-1233. What you will notice is that the geographic areas identified as DI communities by the new definition overlap a lot with the lands covered by the ECMC 100 series definition. There are some slight changes because of certain factors taken into account from the new statute versus our original definition. In the future, ECMC will formally be incorporating this new definition into our rules to edit that 100 series definition. However, until then, we are implementing this new definition as follows regarding OGDPs. For the OGDPs submitted prior to May 23rd, 2023, those will be reviewed under the rules and statutes at the time of submittal. So the ECMC DI community definition. So if there are locations where RBUs that fall under the new DI community definition, the director may decide to extend the public comment period by 15 days under the allowance per Rule 303G. But at this time, we're not asking for any additional plans or attachments to be required. I will say that very few OGDPs have fallen into this category, and those that do have already been contacted by their lead OGLAs and are working through this adjustment in the public comment period. For the OGDPs submitted on or after May 23rd, 2023, these will be reviewed under the statutory requirements at the time of their submittal, which means the House Bill 23-1233 DI community definition. So if there are locations with RBUs that fall under the new DI community definition, then the lead OGLA will reach out proactively as part of their review to notify the operator and discuss the required plans and attachments. As a reminder, just because one of your proposed locations is within a DI community doesn't necessarily trigger additional requirements. It's if the RBU, residential building unit, HOBU, high occupancy building unit, or school facility within 2,000 feet of the proposed location is within a DI community, that the extra public comment period, the normal being 30, the extended being 45, the DI community map, and the community outreach plan become required. So far, only one OGDP was in the new definition and not in the ECMC definition. And they have already been contacted, and the lead OGLA is working with them to get the proper updated plans and attachments and working through their completeness review with them. The final item I wanted to go over is a new GIS map layer that incorporates this new definition. And this map layer should be live right now as of yesterday afternoon, and I checked again this morning. And this is labeled disproportionately impacted communities, parentheses, May 2023. And this will be the new map layer going forward for the OGDPs that are to be submitted. Now, I'll also point out that the older disproportionately impacted communities map layer is going to stay on the map. Like I discussed, the ones submitted prior to May 23rd of this year are still going to be reviewed under that map layer. So until we work through all of those OGDPs, we will have both, but we're asking that the newest one, the May 2023 map layer, be used. And perhaps in the future, as part of that rulemaking, we'll eventually sunset that older one and only keep the May 2023 one. And I do want to give a quick shout out to David Gates and the GIS team for working hand in hand to get this new map layer created and up so quickly for today's presentation. So, big takeaways from all of this. House Bill 23-1233 went into effect on May 23rd. This instituted a new statutory definition for DI communities for all statewide agencies. The Energy and Carbon Management Commission is implementing this in the following 3 ways. First, in the future, there will be a rulemaking to update our 100 series definitions to incorporate the new statutory definition. However, for now, for OGDPs submitted prior to May 23rd, those will still be reviewed under the existing ECMC definition. For those that were submitted on or after May 23rd, those OGDPs will be reviewed under the new DI community definition, and available right now is the new disproportionately impacted communities May 2023 map layer. It is available on our maps, and this is what should be used for your new submittals of OGDPs. And I did also want to just quickly mention, for the very small number of operators and OGDPs that have been kind of caught in the mix in these, everyone's worked really cooperatively with us as we've been implementing this, and we really appreciate the help and partnership in this. And that is all I have for you today. As a reminder, if you have not had your lead OGLAs reach out to you about your OGDPs, that's because you're simply not affected by this, and your OGDPs will continue to be reviewed per normal. Thank you very much, and I will take questions at the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. Up next, we have a Colorado EnviroScreen overview presented by Tessa Sorensen.
Hello. Okay, let me bring this up here. You should be seeing the presentation now. Okay, I'm Tessa Sorensen. I use she, her pronouns. I am the energy liaison for CDPHE, if you have not already met me. I'm going to give an overview of the Colorado EnviroScreen tool today, which is a tool you can use in parallel with the GIS map that was actually just explained, and some of your questions from the prior presentation will probably be answered here. So with that, let's dive right in here. Okay, I'm going to cover what the EnviroScreen tool is for Colorado, as well as a bit of a usage guide. And then we'll talk about the air quality Reg 3 reports that you can generate with one of the tools. And if we have time, we'll do a demo, but this presentation should actually cover most of the points of how to use the tool and how to read it. So the EnviroScreen tool was actually, it's an interactive mapping and health screening tool for Colorado. It was developed by CDPHE in concert with CSU. It was launched last year on June 29th, and that was version 1.0. What the Colorado EnviroScreen tool does is it actually uses population and environmental factors to calculate an overall Colorado EnviroScreen score. And that higher score means that the area is more likely to experience environmental health burdens. So here's a timeline of what the tool development looked like. It started in fall of 2020, progressed through 2 phases of community engagement, as well as a lot of the design and beta versioning, and then it was actually finally delivered in June of 2022. Now, the way that EnviroScreen tool is calculating that score is by taking all of the environmental burden factors and combining that with population characteristics in there. So let's talk about what that really means. That score comes from a combination of what we call pollutant climate burden characteristics and health and social factors. You can see that pollution and climate burden, which we'll break down here for you in a minute, is made up of environmental exposures, effects, and climate vulnerability, as well as the health and social factors related to which sensitive populations and which demographics are in there. So, get my slide up here. Okay. All right, so what does pollution and climate burden mean? There's environmental exposures. These are things such as particulate matter, ozone, air toxics in the air, drinking water quality, the traffic proximity, lead exposure, noise. So some of these obviously apply more to oil and gas than others, but the point of all of these combined is that they actually give a clear picture as best we can at the moment for how exposed a community may be to these various items. Now, for environmental effects, we have things like surface water and waste facilities, proximity to oil and gas or mining, and things like that. And climate vulnerability is the overall kind of broad climate concerns such as drought, wildfire exposures, extreme heat. On the other side of the coin, for the populations themselves, it's actually things such as health conditions and issues and mental health, as well as how much of the population is older than 64 or younger than 5. And then the demographics have to do with linguistic isolation, what the income is, how that relates to their housing cost burden, disability rates, education level, and how many people of color. So how is that methodology weighted? We will take the individual component scores. So for instance, for demographics, it's the geometric mean of the 6 percentiles. So you can see there's a different number in here, and so they're all kind of weighted together. And that comes up to create average group component scores. Those are then scaled up by multiplying by 10, and then they are combined to multiply them both to get to a overall percentile. So this is read in percentiles, and that score will come up with a number that is between 0 and 100 for that. Now, what are the limitations of this tool? And I'll talk about the applicability of this tool as well here in a minute for you as operators. This tool will show you where areas are more likely to have environmental justice issues, where government agencies can prioritize resources or work to reduce pollution or other sources. It can help communities advocate for themselves. It will also identify those geographic areas that meet that statutory definition for use by state agencies and other folks. This does not tell you whether you're in a healthy or unhealthy environment. It will not establish any associations between those risks and health. This is not what this tool does. It cannot be used for that. It doesn't cover everything. There are areas that may have environmental justice or environmental risks that are not calculated under this EnviroScreen tool. And it will provide information about, it will not provide information about individual people. It does not have any of that personal information. It doesn't take everything into account. And it can't go smaller than a census block group, and in some cases, even broader than that. So it does have its limitations. It is just a tool. It is not the end-all be-all by any means. Now, before I get into the demo, let's talk about applicability for operators. This tool is kind of a parallel to what the GIS layer has. It will match that. You can actually look at it in both ways using the GIS layer in ECMC site, or you can look at it using the EnviroScreen tool, which is publicly accessible by just going to the CDPHE website. The website is right there on the slide. You can also just Google Colorado EnviroScreen and it'll take you right there. So as operators, what this can actually do is not just show you where the DI communities are on a map, but it will also point out one thing that is not on the map, which is a point layer of mobile home parks. And we'll talk about that and how that affects it here in a second. And it will give you a good idea of kind of where the exposures are and what the exposures are, so you can tailor your operations to help out whatever communities you may be operating near or in. So to get there, you just go to this EnviroScreen page and click on the big green button on the left here that says Go to Colorado EnviroScreen. I'll talk about the other green button here in a moment. And so once you do that, it'll bring you to a page and load up a map. The first thing you have to do is actually change it to a census block group and hit update, so that you turn this map, which shows some very large areas, as you've noticed, into this map. You can select layers here on the left and select the disproportionately impacted communities May of 2023, much like the ECMC GIS. You can also click the mobile home communities. We don't see a lot of OGDPs that are near or that are very proximate to mobile home communities, but it would be considered a DI community. It's just a point instead of an actual boundary. I recommend searching by lat long. It'll take you to the DI community that it falls within, if there is one. This is a really good layer to kind of give you an idea of which ones are on there. And I'll talk about what some of those categories are here. There's also the Environmental Justice Report. This is the Air Quality Regulation 3 report. This does not specifically apply to OGDP permits, but it does apply to air permits that I know that folks look at usually after an OGDP is approved. So starting in July 15th of 2023, with a Regulation 3 permit, you do have to submit an environmental justice summary prior to submitting your permit application, and this is actually a part of that because it was adopted by the AQCC in May of 2023 at the same time as the adoption of the statutory definitions. Now, those EJ summaries do have to cover environmental health data about the community and where the air pollution source operates. And generally, DI communities will have more environmental pollution exposure, and they'll experience higher levels of environmental health risks. And many of these are low-income families or high populations of people of color. To get to that tool, and we'll explain reading the tool and what all of those definitions mean here in a moment, it's the other green button. Once you click on that one, it will take you to a little page that says Access the tool here. You do have to log in with GIS. Please make sure if you do that, you will actually have to, if you use GIS normally, you will have to use this login to view into it. So clear out any saved cookies for your GIS login information and change it to this particular username and password, which is on that page. Once you do, you'll get into this GIS layer, which will have the top left selected. So you'll want to close out the legend in there and then open up the Generate Regulation 3 report. It's a very similar collection to what you see on the normal Colorado EnviroScreen tool. You can put in lat longs in here as well, and just click on the points that it selects when you go to that lat long, and it will ask you to select that point, and then you just hit next. You can fill out your information here for the purposes of like an OGDP. You don't need to worry about permit types or numbers necessarily. It doesn't really matter what you put in these fields, and you don't actually have to put anything in these fields. What it does is it populates the report with that information on the top of the report, whatever you entered in there. And once you hit run report, it'll cycle for a few seconds, and then it'll give you a little pop-up that says, do you want to click to download the report? Once you do that, it'll actually create a PDF that you can read, and we'll look at that in a second. But first, let's talk about all those definitions. I'm not going to cover this in exhaustive detail because a lot of it was already covered in the prior presentation. It was adopted in House Bill 21-1266 and then revised in 23-1233 to implement those recommendations from the Environmental Justice Task Force. We want to operate on the census block group scale. When you're looking at this, you want to make sure you're going down to that scale to get the most granular. Now, here's the important point for you. Agencies can prioritize or target certain criteria that meet the definition through a public rulemaking process. A good example of this is the Air Pollution Reg 3 permits, which do not actually include the federal definition of a DI community, which I'll talk about here in a second, known as Justice 40 or the CESTJ layer on there. It's one of the reasons why you see some really broad areas highlighted in that GIS layer. within the ECMC layers. So if a rulemaking happens that ECMC decides to consider, the commission decides to consider only certain ones for permitting process, they certainly may, and that could change. But I am not with the ECMC, so I can't speak on their processes there. So what is that definition? You can find these on the EnviroScreen site. You can also find them at the bottom of every one of those Reg 3 environmental reports. But here's the overall definitions. For demographics, it's 40% of low-income households that are which means at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. 40% people of color. 50% housing burden households. So they basically spend more than 30% of their monthly income on housing costs. And 20% linguistically isolated, so limited English-speaking households. What I will mention on this for your OGDPs, if you have to do something like informed consent and you know you're in a linguistically isolated area, it would certainly be helpful for those communities if that informed consent was in multiple languages. Things like that can help design your plan for any of those OGDPs. And then there's cumulative impacts. So this is the environmental exposure side of things more than anything. A cumulatively impacted community is defined by Colorado as a Colorado EnviroScreen score in the 80th percentile or above. So once that EnviroScreen score hits 80, it is then classified as a cumulatively impacted community. And so all those rules that go along with that will be in there. From what I understand at the moment, that definition is only utilized by air permits. That, of course, is subject to change based on any commission rulemaking. There is also this is what we call Justice 40, the Federal Council on Environmental Quality's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, which is quite the mouthful. That's why a lot of people just call it Justice 40, is another census tract that identifies it as a cumulatively impacted community. These are very broad. They do not tend to get as small as the census block groups on the EnviroScreen tool or by the statutory definitions adopted by the state, but those definitions do include the Justice 40 definitions. You'll see counties on the western slope that have very broad areas simply because they fall into the Justice 40 definition. There is a history prong in here, and that is basically the ability for any community to lobby that or claim that they are actually in a disproportionately impacted community. So there is a definition in here that allows people to self-identify through histories of discriminatory laws and policies. A good example of one that would have been a long time ago but is not now falls into that is like Leadville. There were a lot of discriminatory policies in Leadville towards Asian Americans. Now there are not. It would not fall under that necessarily now, but it leaves that option open for certain communities to be able to self-identify through evidence. The reservations also fall under criteria of disproportionately impacted communities, and so do mobile home parks. Mobile home parks being not on that GIS layer because, of course, they are a point, not a shape. So let's clear this up in a nice, easy chart here. There are DI communities and there is a cumulatively impacted community. DI community involves the socioeconomically vulnerable communities, the Justice 40 definition, as well as mobile home parks. Those SVCs, it can include those 4 definitions we talked about earlier of low income, people of color, housing cost burden, or linguistically isolated. And the CIC is basically just an EnviroScreen of 80% or more. So if you run this EJ Reg 3 report, and I ran it here for the CDPHE main offices here in Denver, and you can see that it actually would fall under a DI community definition. Now, one caveat I want to mention about using this particular report, it does not include mobile home parks. It also does not include the federal Justice 40 layer. So those are not in there because they were elected not to be used in this report by the AQCC. So you can see at this point it qualifies for people of color. If you were to drill for some reason in Glendale, you would actually be a miracle worker for being able to get a rig in there, but you would also be able be subject to DI community concerns there. So this gives you a good overview of where you're at how much is in there. There's details on exactly what those individual scores are that come up with the overall score. You can see here we're not in a CIC because we have an EnviroScreen of 39. As the energy liaison, I do consult on occasion on OGDPs, and I do include this report in our letters to the ECMC director after those consultations, purely for information purposes only, also as evidence to demonstrate whether something is in one of the DI communities or whether it is in a CIC. Okay, a little highlight on the history here. We've had a lot of users on this site so far. We're very excited about it. It is a work in progress. We do plan a second version of this coming up. The launch in June 2023 of the Reg 3 tool has been very well received. It's really easy to use, and I think it can give you a good baseline for what your plans are with your particular operation. Our update plan is in progress right now. We are actually in our recommendations for 2.0 at the moment. We're just starting that up right now, and we're going to collect public feedback on that, and then we're going to implement it. And so you can see in the summer of next year, hopefully version 2.0 will be coming out and will be updated with and be even better. At that point, that's it for us on CDPHE. Thank you for your attention.
Awesome.
I
Thank you
think
so
we'll
much.
skip the demo, Jenny, just in the interest of time.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Perfect. Thank you. So we will now move on to the Q&A part of the meeting. Our first question is the new Form 7W is not available yet on the website, but is still due on Friday.
Thanks, Jenny. I'll take that question. Yeah, so the statute requires the produced water data to be reported concurrently with production reporting beginning September 1st, 2023. Since the produced water data report is not yet fully functional, you may submit the produced water data via email to me at greg.duranlo@state.co.us prior to the Form 7 development being complete, or reach out to me and let me know that you're ready to report and you want to be a testing operator for the tab.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Greg. Next question. How often will Form 46/46A be due?
The Form 46, if there's not really going to be an additional Form 46 unless something changes or the manufacturer finds an error in what they've submitted already. So you're kind of one and done as long as everything was correct and nothing ever changes. And the 46A, you will only need a new 46A if additional chemicals are used on the location. But you will only need to provide the new product. So you won't have to go back and re-enter everything that's already been entered. You will only add to the list. And the chemical list will auto-generate based on the Form 46As that have been submitted to that site. So again, the 46A will only need to be submitted with additional information.
Okay, thank you, Arthur. Next question. What is the difference between MI and MII?
I'll take that one again, Jenny. So M has previously been established as commercial disposal. MI is intended for Class 1 disposal well as permitted and administered by the US EPA. And MII is commercial Class 2 disposal well as administered by ECMC. In either case, the preferred facility ID is the location where the well is located, or if separate, the location ID where the tank battery is located, where the load of produced water is dropped.
All right, awesome. Next question. Can you define downhole chemicals, example, drilling fluids, production chemicals, scale inhibitor, what all is included in downhole chemicals?
And this is from the legislation itself from HB 22 1348. Downhole operations mean oil and gas production operations that are conducted underground. Chemical products mean any product that consists of one or more chemicals and is sold or distributed for use in downhole operations in the state. And chemical product can include additive, base fluids, hydraulic fracturing fluids. And so I think they include pretty much any chemical that goes down the hole should be reported. Although House Bill 22-1348 did not specifically call out drilling fluid, it seems like that, to me at least, that it meets the definition of a downhole operation and should probably be included on the Form 46A.
All right, perfect. Let's see, next question. July production reports are due on September 15th. Any chance the produced water tab will be functional before the due date?
So likely not. We're other than for testing. We're close, but not quite there. So we don't want you to delay your monthly production reporting. Instead, submit your monthly production reporting as required, and you may submit the produced water data report via email to me if you're ready to report that. And you can include the data template at that time. And or again, if you want to be one of the testing operators, that will certainly satisfy your reporting requirements as well.
Thank you, Greg. Next question, how can operators access the updated produced water data template since the button within the new produced water tab is not live yet?
Thanks, that's mine also. So the data template has, in terms of the columns that are required, has not been changed since we put it out there in July. So it's available on the operator meetings archive and information page. I will also make sure it's the current version that I described earlier will be posted later today at our website under under regulations, forms, form 7, and it will be listed in the templates there.
Awesome. Next question. Can you please further explain CP for water facilities?
I feel like I'm on a roll here. Let's see. So for monthly reporting by the well, ECMC is looking for the first receiving facility location to be listed as the disposal facility and disposal method. So even if even if produced water from a well is routed to a centralized disposal well for its final disposition, if the first facility it goes to is a pit at a centralized E&P waste management facility, then that's what should be reported as the disposal location. And Jenny, I'm going to share my screen again, and maybe I can help clear this up. So this example here, the wells on this production well pad, even if, and I'll add an arrow here, even if the water ultimately goes from this first centralized E&P waste management facility down to this well, we still want to see it reported to its first point on the disposal train. And so that is this centralized E&P waste management facility where it's stored in a pit prior to being disposed. We think that'll be the most straightforward way for reporting for each of these 6 wells. If it goes directly from a production well pad to disposal, then it's CW. But if it's stopping at this centralized waste management facility for, an unknown amount of time, it's and ultimately getting disposed of down a well, we want to see that as CP. And so that's sort of, I guess that's a new way of looking at that disposal. But again, it's sort of the first stop on the disposal train. So hopefully that clears that up a little bit more.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Greg. Next question. How are we to next question. Where do we get the new definition until 100 series is updated?
Right, there's a couple places you can actually get that, and I'll show you one of them. Probably the easiest way here is to go to the EnviroScreen webpage. And if you actually just scroll down on here, you'll notice that it says, what's the new definition? And it actually gives you all of those definitions on there. It's also at the bottom of every Regulation 3 Justice report. It will actually show you exactly what the descriptions are in the text at the bottom of the report.
Awesome. Thank you, Tessa. Next question. How are we to handle the difference between what we send off-site for disposal versus what we were invoiced for that was actually disposed of? Our total pad volumes were sent to 2 different disposal walls, but not all water sent for report period was actually disposed of.
So I'm interpreting that to mean that you sent water off-site to a commercial facility, but they aren't invoicing until it goes down their disposal well. And I'm not sure if that's what you mean by that question. So I guess I will describe a scenario. If you produce, let's say you produce 100 barrels in a month, but your water pickup is on the 20th of the month. And so only 70 barrels are sent for disposal. Then on the Form 7 production report, you will still report 100 barrels, but on the produced water report, you will only report the 70 barrels that went off-site for disposal. So hopefully that's the question that's being asked there, that you only report what was actually sent for disposal. And I'm sorry if I misunderstood that question.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Next question. Can you please further explain CP for water facilities?
I think I did. That the difference there between CP and CW, we want to see CW as it's going directly to a well. So we'll see that more in for example, a water flood situation, where the water is being, sent over to whichever well is on injection for disposal. But generally the water systems, I think we will see more CP because the first point on the disposal train is the pit at the centralized E&P waste management facility.
Thank you, Greg. Next question. Any updates on a path forward regarding the October 15th federal financial assurance deadline to ECMC, given the recent BLM bonding rulemaking?
I'll take that one, Jenny. Thanks, Jenna, for asking about that. I was not aware that the BLM had made progress, so I appreciate that. And yes, this October 15th deadline for providing financial assurance for wells that are federal, we are very much on our radar, but we don't have any updates right now on the path forward. So I will let people know as soon as we do, or someone here will provide some guidance on that. So thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Let's see, last question. What is the best way to accurately capture a DIC block group listed in the EnviroScreen May 2023 DI community type as more than one category?
Hey, Jenny, Stephen here. I'll grab this one. This has to do with the different layers within the GIS map itself. If the location meets more than one category, the different individual layers stack on top of each other and will only give the more than one type met. If you click on the folder in our GIS maps, it'll bring you the drop down, and you can click on and click off each of those individual layers. Unfortunately, it does only show that meets more than one label, so you'll have to toggle on and off the different ones to see which are the specific multiple criteria that are yielding that category. And as a reminder, when you're looking to tailor your OGDP, particularly the community outreach plan, to accommodate the specific community needs, those different toggles can identify what the criteria are, but the EnviroScreen is also an extra additional tool to help tailor it even more because of the added functionality of that tool.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Stephen. That is all my questions, unless anyone wants to add anything else. If not, here are our next meeting dates. Our next meeting will be October 10th. And then, as always, if you have any questions or want to be added to the operator email list, please let me know. Otherwise, I feel like we are ready to adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, I just wanted to say thank you. I already got an email with someone volunteering to test the Form 7 produced water data reporting, so appreciate that.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll see you next
Thank you,
time.
Jenny, for hosting.
You're very welcome.